In the last week of April 1967, United States Marines fought their way up a jungle ridge called Hill 881, near Khe Sanh in South Vietnam, through machine gun fire, monsoon rain, and mud. When the survivors came down, one of them wrote a letter home. His platoon had gone up the hill with 72 men, he wrote, and come back with 19. Then he told his mother the part that would end up in front of the United States Congress. You know what killed most of us? Our own rifle. Marine after dead Marine had been found on that hillside with his M16 broken open beside him, because he had spent the last seconds of his life trying to clear a jammed cartridge instead of shooting back. 18 months earlier, this same rifle had been publicly credited with winning the first great American battle of the Vietnam War. This is the autopsy of the M16, and the finding is strange. The cause of death was never designed into this rifle. It was purchased into it. To understand what happened, you have to understand who owned rifles in America. Since 1777, the Army's small arms had been the property of one institution, the Ordnance Corps and its crown jewel, the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. Ordnance designed the rifles, tested the rifles, built the rifles, and had done so for almost 2 centuries. Their newest creation was the M14, adopted in 1957, essentially a product-improved M1 Garand, firing the full-power 7.62mm NATO cartridge. Walnut, forged steel, tradition. And then there was the outsider. Eugene Stoner was a former Marine and a self-taught engineer working for Armalite, a tiny California design shop attached to an aircraft company. Stoner built rifles the way aviation people build things: an aluminum receiver, fiberglass and plastic furniture, and a radical little cartridge, the 5.56mm, barely more than half the weight of the Army's round. The result, the AR-15, weighed under 7 pounds, kicked like a polite suggestion, and could be held on target in full automatic fire by a 19-year-old. To the ordnance establishment, this was a triple insult: a toy caliber, a plastic rifle, and worst of all, not invented here. When the two designs met in trials in the late 1950s, the Army chose the M14. The outsider lost, exactly as everyone expected. Then, the M14 began to fail on its own. Production ran late and over budget, and in full automatic fire, the powerful cartridge made the rifle nearly uncontrollable. Meanwhile, the AR-15 kept finding unlikely friends. On the 4th of July, 1960, at a birthday party on a Maryland farm, Air Force General Curtis LeMay was handed an AR-15 and invited to shoot watermelons with it. The melons detonated. LeMay was delighted and ordered the rifle for Air Force security forces. In 1962, the Pentagon's Advanced Research Agency shipped about 1,000 AR-15 rifles to South Vietnamese troops under Project Agile, and the field reports that came back were glowing. In January 1963, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, staring at the M14's broken production numbers, shut the program down. That November, the Pentagon approved what it called a one-time buy: 85,000 rifles, designated XM16E1 for the Army, and 19,000 for the Air Force. On paper, the outsider had won. In reality, the Army now owned a rifle it had never wanted, purchased over its objections by civilians in suits, and it treated that rifle accordingly. Internally, the M16 was a stopgap, a temporary embarrassment to be tolerated until Ordnance's true next-generation wonder weapon, a flechette firing project called SPYW, was ready. Spoiler: SPIW never worked. The stopgap is still in service 60 years later. Now watch the chain of decisions, because this is where the rifle was actually killed. Decision 1. The powder. Stoner had developed the AR-15 around a DuPont extruded powder called IMR 4475. It burned clean, and the rifle was reliable with it. But at scale, that powder struggled to consistently hit the Army's required muzzle velocity of 3,250 feet per second within pressure limits. So the Army qualified a substitute, a ball propellant from Olin Matheson called WC846. Ball powder met the velocity spec. It also burned dirtier, leaving calcium carbonate residue through the gas system, and it drove the rifle's cyclic rate from around 800 rounds per minute to nearly 1,000. A faster, dirtier rifle is a rifle that jams. Decision 2, and this is the one that should stop you cold. Colt, the manufacturer, told the Army it could no longer guarantee that rifles would pass their acceptance tests using ball powder ammunition. The Army's solution was not to fix the ammunition. The Army permitted Colt to test the rifles for acceptance using the old clean powder, while the troops in Vietnam were issued the new dirty one. More than 330,000 rifles were delivered under that arrangement. The rifles were passing tests with ammunition the soldiers would never see. The failure was not hidden in the system. It was written into the paperwork. Decision 3. The chamber. In the wet heat of Southeast Asia, an unprotected steel chamber pits and corrodes in days, and a corroded chamber grips a fired cartridge case like a weld. Chrome plating the chamber solves this, and it was left off. Decision 4. Maintenance. The rifle shipped to Vietnam without enough cleaning kits, without chamber brushes, in many units without cleaning rods at all, and Colt's own advertising had suggested the weapon needed remarkably little maintenance, a claim that curdled, in the ranks, into a rumor that the M16 cleaned itself. And behind all of it sat Decision 5, the quiet one. Why invest in fixing a stopgap? SPIW was coming. Every one of these decisions had a defensible reason: cost, schedule, production capacity. Stacked on top of each other, they took a rifle Congresses would later call excellent and turned it into a machine for creating the exact scene described in that Marine's letter. Because at first, the rifle delivered. In November 1965, in the Ia Drang Valley, troopers of the 1st Cavalry Division fought off numerically superior North Vietnamese regulars in the war's first major set-piece battle, and their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, said afterward, "Brave soldiers and the M16 brought this victory." Then, through 1966 and into 1967, the malfunctions became chronic. The signature failure was the one armorers call failure to extract. The rifle fires, the empty case stays welded inside the pitted chamber, and the only fix is to find a rod, run it down the muzzle, and hammer the case out while someone is shooting at you. Marines received their M16s in the spring of 1967, some of them just weeks before they were sent up the slopes of hills 861 and 881. The photographs from that spring show the adaptation the troops invented themselves. Cleaning rods taped along the handguards of their rifles, so the tool for unjamming the weapon would be there the instant it was needed. Soldiers scrounged rods, begged relatives to mail them commercial gun oil, and wrote home about dead friends. Some units quietly asked for their old M14s back. In May 1967, the letters reached the newspapers, and the newspapers reached Congress. The House Armed Services Committee formed a special subcommittee under Representative Richard Ichord of Missouri, and it spent months taking testimony from generals, engineers, and riflemen. Its report, released that October, is one of the most brutal documents in the history of American military procurement, and its findings deserve to be read plainly. The subcommittee found that the rifle, as originally developed, was, in its words, an excellent and reliable weapon. It found that ball powder was the major contributor to the malfunctions in Vietnam. It found that the decision to change powders was, quote, not justified or supported by test data. And it found that the failure of Army officials to correct the ammunition's known deficiencies, quote, bordered on criminal negligence. That phrase, from a congressional report about the deaths of American soldiers, is about as close to an indictment as the system ever produces. No one was charged. No one went to trial. No career visibly ended over it. The fixes, once the scandal forced them, were almost embarrassingly straightforward. The M16A1 got a chrome-plated chamber. A redesigned buffer brought the cyclic rate back down. Cleaning kits flooded into Vietnam, along with a maintenance manual unlike anything the Army had ever printed. a full comic book, drawn by the studio of the legendary cartoonist Will Eisner, teaching 19-year-olds to care for their rifle the way they would care for a demanding girlfriend. It worked. By the end of the decade, the M16A1 had become what it should have been on day one: light, accurate, and reliable. And the family it founded has now served American forces longer than any rifle in the nation's history. And in a final stroke of historical irony, as the Ichord report was landing on desks in Washington, the Springfield Armory, the ordnance establishment's home since 1777, the house that had fought this rifle from the beginning, was shutting its doors forever. So here is the finding. The M16 scandal is usually told as the story of a flawed rifle, and that story is false. It is the story of a healthy rifle delivered into the custody of an institution that had been forced to adopt it and never chose to accept it. No one sat in a room and decided to sabotage the weapon. They didn't have to. A bureaucracy can kill a thing it resents without ever rejecting it, by substituting, deferring, economizing, and testing around the problem, one defensible memo at a time, until the sum of the paperwork is a dead Marine on a hillside with a broken rifle across his knees. Cause of death: adopted, but never accepted. If you want more autopsies of history's worst military decisions, subscribe to Battle Autopsy. Next on the table, as promised, the amphibious raid that failed completely and was supposed to. Thanks for watching.